and welcome to episode 9 of the Sci-Fi Podcast. From Bloomington, Indiana, I'm Nick Zoutra. Joining us today is someone who has personally helped me to succeed in history and philosophy of science, Dr. Jane Maienschein, professor and director of the Center for Biology and Society at Arizona State University. Jane specializes in the history and philosophy of biology and the way biology, bioethics, and biopolicy play out in society. She also serves as fellow and directs the History and Philosophy of Science project at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Jane and her team research embryology, genetics, and cell biology. They analyze epistemological standards, theories, and laboratory practices, and combine that with their studies of people and institutions, as well as the changing social, political, and legal context in which science thrives. Jane loves teaching and is committed to public education about biology and its human dimensions. And as I mentioned initially, Jane has helped me personally, as well as a number of other students, succeed in the history and philosophy of science. While doing a master's at Arizona State University, Jane really did an excellent job in helping to introduce me into the history and philosophy of science, as I came from the backgrounds of psychology and neuroscience, by providing an engaging and supportive learning environment, and ultimately when helping me to select PhD programs, of which I chose Indiana, she was extremely helpful and supportive along the way. So I'm very excited to introduce Jane to you and to share the wonderful conversation that we got to have. We get to discuss a number of really, I think, exciting and important things going on in the history and philosophy of science, as well as a number of the exciting and important things going on in the History and Philosophy of Science graduate program at Arizona State University. So, without further ado, let's bring in Jane. Jane Maienschein, welcome to the Sci-Fi Podcast. How are you this afternoon?
Just fine, thanks.
That's great. How are things getting along over there at Arizona State?
Busy as always. So it's the spring semester. What in terms of busyness are you up to currently? We are always doing new things and continuing old things here. And one of the things that we do every semester is the Embryo Project Seminar. Mm-hmm. And that's a class that has undergraduate and graduate students writing in a writer's workshop setting. They learn to do research, they learn to write, and that's always fun because we get about half the class continues the second, third, fourth, even fifth semester with the course, but then we always get new ones coming in, so seeing what they're excited about and how they learn how to write for a general audience and how to learn using a style manual that isn't just creative writing, but has to meet certain forms. That's always a challenge, and it's great fun.
Yeah. How have you seen with this class in particular? Maybe we'll talk about it later. Training students to write for a general audience. Have you seen that impact some of the more scholarly work that they then do in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So the students who come to it are mostly science students. They come from a variety of different fields: engineering, biochemistry, School of Life Sciences. A few from the humanities and elsewhere, but they're mostly a little freaked out and worried about science, so they're afraid to try it.
Sure.
So it's science students, and they really, some of them want to write and communicate effectively, but don't feel like they've had very many opportunities to do that, and so they get really excited. We encourage them to take it early enough, which is why some of them take it 2, 3, 4, 5 semesters. And often it'll turn into honors thesis and then even the accelerated bachelor's master's program. Some students decide they didn't want to go to med school after all and they want to go into PhD program and do science communication. So that's great. But even more importantly is reaching all of them, and each one learns to be more effective in his or her own writing.
Very nice. It sounds like a really good opportunity then.
It's fun. It's really fun.
Oh, cool. Well, let's start a little bit back at the beginning. So, Jane, where did you grow up?
Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Wow, great. What kind of town is Oak Ridge?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. It's sitting there right in southern Appalachia or Appalachia, depending on where what accent you want. But it's sitting there, and it's one of the best, most educated towns with one of the best school systems in the country. So there we were, being surrounded by gorgeous mountains and by people who, many of whom were struggling in poverty. That has changed a lot, but in coal mining towns and all of that sort of surrounding. And then there we are with the school, the high school that in my year we competed with Bronx High School of Science for the largest number of National Merit Scholars and people getting 800s on their math boards, and because of Oak Ridge National Lab. So it was a really good setting that taught about the beauties of nature, the excitement of science, and in a context where you're aware of people. So science and society are kind of, why are we doing this science? They're kind of intersecting right there in a way that I think made a number of us reflective.
Yeah. So growing up, were you interested in science? Coming.
Oh yeah. The only question in my family. So my dad is a nuclear physicist. He was head of the nuclear physics division there, and the only question is what science we were going to do. My brother and I. And so it was kind of a curiosity when I decided to do history and philosophy of science, because I said, I don't want to have to pick one thing. I want to look at the nature of science generally. And my dad thought, well, that's a little strange. Well, okay. I mean, my parents are super supportive, so it was okay in the end, but a little surprising to them. But right, so it was all going to be about science.
Okay, but were there ever, before though you got to history and philosophy of science, were you originally thinking, okay, I just want to do a science, or was there something, did you think about becoming a physicist or something else?
Yeah, I think my case. So, what good can you learn from case studies? Philosophers always ask, but my case shows that serendipity matters, and that most of us who have come to where we are have wandered to get there, wandered and maybe wondered as well. But so I went my freshman year to MIT to be an astrophysicist, and then they said, "Oh wait, I hate differential equations. It's totally boring." And so let's not do that. And then transferred to Yale when they let in women for the first time, and did a degree called History, the Arts and Letters. And so there I am, schizophrenic: astrophysics, math, history, the arts and letters. Oh wait, let's put that all together. And so Indiana University had a program, History and Philosophy of Science, which I heard about and said, oh, let's go there. As it turned out, my dad had gone to IU as a grad student too, so I went there to spite that.
To IU?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Oh, so he did physics at IU? Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was in physics at IU, so our dissertations sit next to each other in the library, so people said,
my gosh.
Him. I say, no, I went there to spite that.
Yeah. That's fantastic. How did, so you'd gone to MIT and then Yale, history of arts and letters. So what kind of history were you getting into there?
All of history, but there were a few people like Larry Holmes and Martin Klein who came to our seminars and taught us that there is such a field as history of science. So I said, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Then I discovered there was a field of philosophy of science and took a course in that as an undergraduate, and said, oh, that's even cooler. So how do we put these two together to think about the nature of science and science in the larger world?
Very nice, very nice. So you made it over to Bloomington, Indiana.
Yep.
Yeah, what did you begin studying there?
Well, at Indiana, so you know this. So when you're at IU, they say, oh, you need to minor in something. And at the time that I was there, when I arrived, they said to all of us students, all right, you have a choice. Do you want a minor in history or a minor in philosophy? And I said, no, biology. And they said, oh, that's not an option. That's not on the list. And so I said, well, okay, let's make it on the list. And Fred Churchill, my advisor, was wonderful and said, okay, you go make a proposal and figure out how this will work, and we'll make it happen. And so there were a number of us, wonderful people I was grad students with, Ron Ranger, John Beatty, Keith Benson was there for a while, and many other wonderful people. And we all just sort of moved back and forth across the street over between biology and the history and philosophy of science programs. So those connections were really important. Some of the faculty members like Rudy Raff and Robert Briggs I worked with are biologists who are well known, and Tracy Sonneborn, they were very generous, and they were just keen to talk about ideas, to talk about things like, how do we even as scientists, so they're saying, how do we think as scientists about what our underlying assumptions are and what kinds of choices we've made, and why do we do it this way rather than that way, and what can you philosopher, historian people tell us about that? And then we would have lively discussions, and then we would read things together in a reading group and talk about them. And that was incredibly fruitful, incredibly wonderful, stimulating time intellectually.
That sounds fascinating. Do you happen to recall any ideas or particular lines of thought you were considering at the time?
That's kind of like what counts as a line of thought. We could have a little metaphysical question about that, but let's don't.
Sure.
Yeah, but well, so we picked up on themes of the time. So sociobiology, Ed Wilson's book had just come out. Steve Gould was publishing various things that we read. Garland Allen had written Life Science in the 20th Century. So both historical and biological works were there. There were various philosophical works as well that we read and argued about and talked about. Is this right? Is that right? At the time, Wes Salmon was there in philosophy and kept talking about, okay, what do we count as evidence? What's an experiment? How do you find it in this biology world? It looks really different. How do you find experiments in the evolutionary biology world? And so we, I guess, probably, did the usual thing grad students do and had a lot of kind of bull sessions where we talked around in circles, but, asking questions about, about how evolutionary biology can be a science. And then people were starting to talk a lot about molecular biology and genetics. I was fascinated by development and embryology, and so were the biologists, but philosophers and historians largely weren't yet. So that was kind of fun to spend a lot of time with the biologists and ask them why they thought that historians were picking up so much on the molecular story and not talking about morphogenesis and, how does an organism get to be an organism? Isn't that really interesting?
Yeah, why were they? Why was there why weren't they as interested, or why hadn't they touched on that detail as much?
Oh, that's a long story. Read my books. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, I'll go tell the people I know.
Yeah, it is a long story, but the point is that there very much was a fascination with molecularization, with genetics as somehow maybe giving a causal account that people were looking for, maybe a simplistic account, and looking at the complexity of organization, of individuality, of what makes an organism work and change over time. Those are harder questions. Maybe, I'm making it sound ridiculous, like, oh, yeah, genetics is easy and embryology is hard. But in a certain sense, that's right. And so it's taken longer to figure out how to untangle some of the questions so that we can address them philosophically and historically, I think. Fantastic.
So, so coming out of Indiana, where were you off to next?
Oh, I wandered off to, so I finished my degree at a time when there were no jobs. People now think there are no jobs, but there were really no jobs then.
Really? Yeah, what was it like?
And yeah, it was worse. Statistically, it was actually worse in the very late 1970s and early 1980s than it is now. And there weren't postdocs yet, really. But I went to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, to Dickinson College, and that was wonderful. And I
think
there's a lesson here for the case study as well, but a lesson here for young folks today. So I went because one of my office mates in graduate school, Robert Paul, who was a wonderful guy, he had gone to Dickinson College, and he was part of a group that got a grant to look at science, society, and self. And so he he asked me, did I want to come and be part of that? And I said, of course I do. I have no idea what it is. And I mean, I have to suspend disbelief and worry and just think that something good will happen. So I went there for 2 years, and I think, there really is a lesson here that you can make opportunities. And so I know a lot of younger folks coming out of grad school now, or buried in the middle of grad school, really worry, oh my God, what am I going to do for a job? How am I going to fight and put myself in position to get the one job in my field that will occur in the time that I'm looking? And my message here is really look more broadly. I mean, be true to yourself. What do you love? Is it teaching? Is it thinking? Is it whatever? But look more broadly. Look beyond the standard categories that everybody else is looking at. Look at what kind of opportunities there are to connect in interdisciplinary ways. Our students from Arizona State have all been getting jobs of various sorts, and almost all those jobs have been because they're able to bridge sciences and philosophy and or history of science, because they're happy and know how to work in multidisciplinary groups and can help to translate and interpret ideas. And so being willing to sort of try things and developing the skills to be able to do them, I think is really, 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 really important.
So what are the if you were to describe the types of skills required to work in multidisciplinary settings, what kinds of skills would those be? What are you training your students over there at Arizona State University to do?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't want to. I mean, in the world today, everything seems to be black and white, and you have to be oppositional, and I don't mean it that way. But the traditional approach in philosophy, in particular, is to engage the existing literature. There's certain sort of leading figures, like we all have to read X. I won't name the X's, but there's certain things that we all have to read, and then we have to, in graduate school, somehow in seminar papers, we have to write commentary on that work, and then somebody writes the commentary on somebody's commentary on somebody's commentary, and you have to sort of show that you can play the game internally and talk to the 5 other philosophers or 50 other philosophers at most who actually pay attention to that literature. Well, our approach is to say, fine, yes, you want to master those skills too, but learning to be light on your feet, to navigate in worlds that will challenge, and say, why the heck are you doing that? That's totally boring. People who will ask you to try to explain what you're doing in, an elevator speech type of thing, communicating history and philosophy of science to a larger world in multiple ways. We at Arizona State, we encourage all of our students to get involved with embryo project writing, but also that includes editing. Grad students really run that project along with me. Learning to edit, learning to publish in a digital online environment. Embryo Project now gets over 1 million page views a year, and it's been cited in Nature and in Science and PNAS, but also used by high school teachers. And that's what we want, that you can interpret ideas for a broad audience, meaning not just everybody in the 6th grade, but a diverse audience. So multiple people will pick up on those ideas. That carries over in the academic world. So with a PhD, you might become executive director of a unit or of a project, and your role is to help people from different disciplines work together. Some of those folks are paid more than faculty members, certainly than lecturers, and many PhDs sneer at those jobs on the one hand, or don't know they exist and don't try for them. And so those are the kinds of things I mean.
Very nice. So how did you come to develop this kind of pedagogical approach to teaching students? Was this something that you had been working on at Carlisle, or is this something you over the years have come to see as essential for the field?
Bumble around and try things. An empirical experimental method. Oh, let's try this. Oh, that didn't work so well. Let's try something else. Oh, that worked well. Yeah, that's basically my approach. And I realize that's not what you're supposed to do when you're trying to get tenure or when you're trying to get promoted or whatever.
Yeah.
But I encourage it because the people who are really successful and smart and happy are the ones who try things and discover what really works for them and something new they can share.
Absolutely. So how long, just taking a step back, I've liked what you've said so far. At Carlisle, was there any places in between before you made a move to Arizona State?
No, there I was at Dickinson College and saying, okay, I need to look for jobs. And so I applied for the 3 jobs that existed that were even vaguely related to my field. Well, actually, I applied for the 2 jobs that existed. And then somebody called me from Arizona State, who was the head of philosophy program, and he said, "Hey, Dr. Maienschein, I've heard of you from somebody who actually had been at IU. I've heard of you, and we have a position in philosophy of technology, and this was in October, and we need somebody to start in January to teach an engineering program in collaboration with philosophy. Are you interested?" And I said, I have no idea what philosophy of technology is, but absolutely, I'm interested. That's a kind of being light on your feet and willing to try things. Absolutely, I'm interested. So he said, okay, we're interviewing a few people at the upcoming PSA HSS meetings, and okay, great. I'll talk to folks there, and then I got that job. But then I also got the other 2 I had applied for, and I think it was because by then, I'd gotten kind of willing to again be light on my feet, not have to fit in a certain slot. So I came to Arizona State because I thought even back then it was a place that had opportunity. I mean, first of all, it's a place where they said, "Oh, you've already done enough publications, so you're guaranteed tenure." So that was kind of nice. But
that's nice.
but then they said, "Oh, well, why don't you come? We don't really know where you would fit exactly, so you can kind of make things work. Try things and see what works." And that was great for me. That was perfect. That would probably scare the heck out of most people and most of my colleagues. I mean, I'm not very brave, but it just sounded like fun. Most of my colleagues thought I was crazy, especially because, I turned down a job at Johns Hopkins, and they all thought that was totally nuts. But, I was right. It worked out. It's been great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So was there, in deciding between Arizona State and Johns Hopkins, was Johns Hopkins like the more traditional kind of requirements, whereas Arizona State was go do it, like kind of here is your lab, here is your space to do fun things.
Yep.
Oh,
let's go. Yeah, at ASU it was okay. Figure it out. I mean, again, we don't know exactly what we want you to do, but you'll have a position and just try it.
That sounds great. And so I'm curious because I know we've gotten to know you obviously from attending Arizona State, doing the master's program there, but also doing some really lovely summer programs at the Marine Biological Institute, the MBL, or Marine Biological Laboratories, I should say. Can you tell me a little bit about your history with them and working with them?
Yeah, I love the MBL. It's such a great place, as you know.
Oh, yes.
So it's not just because when you live in Arizona, you really want to go somewhere like Cape Cod for the summer. But when I was in graduate school, I was doing history of embryology, and I was sort of fuddling around, and there was a guy who was a philosopher of science, Roger Buck, who said to me, "Oh, you should do an NSF doctoral dissertation improvement grant proposal, and you should go off to the MBL and you should study the embryology there," because I had been reading all these piles of things about, by people who had been at the MBL, and he said, "Well, why don't you go there?" And he had just recently been on a panel for this program, and I hadn't heard of. I mean, I'd heard of NSF, but I hadn't heard of doctoral dissertation grants, and I had no idea how to do it. And he wasn't my advisor and not even on my committee, but he was very kind, and he said, "I've just been on the panel, and I know what proposals should look like, and I'll help you write one." And so he did, and so I did, and so I went. I mean, I got my first little NSF grant for $1,600, which is embarrassing today, but
sure,
to go for 6 weeks to the MBL, and that was 1975.
Oh, wow.
And so I fell in love with it, and then I didn't get to go back very much, but then when it was their centennial in 88, but actually 87, in preparing for the centennial. Garland Allen and I started a course which you have participated in. So the History of Biology seminar. We started that in 1987, and then we skipped 1 year. But the Dibner Institute paid for it, the Dibner Foundation and the Dibner Institute paid for it. And then Arizona State has been paying for it, and we're about to have our 30th year coming up.
Oh, wow.
That's a week-long seminar, intensive, crazy, fun sort of thing. But in addition, we have developed the MBL History Project with funding from NSF as well. Thank you, NSF. And that has brought graduate students each for the last 4 summers, working intensively, and before that, less systematically, but to develop the MBL History Project, which is another online digital publishing project. So grad students learn how to tell discover stories, and then tell stories, and then see the stories. How do you present them visually? So we work on visual exhibits, and we're working with the MBL in collaboration on that. So, and Manfred Leffler has been a part of that. And also Carl Matlin from the University of Chicago, who is in surgery, but has recently, he recently has turned to history of cell biology. Carl Matlin has been super helpful with that project and brings a different perspective and is a wonderful partner. So that's brought people together from different fields, and again, working with MBL and the MBL library.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious, was it always the case that the MBL was particularly warm and inviting to those from neighboring disciplines such as history and philosophy of science?
Yeah, actually they really have been. And I won't say always. There were a couple of years where there was a blip, but from the beginning, and actually in the very early years, in 1890s, there was a philosopher who went, and Jacques Lube, the biologist, had this philosopher come and teach a course in the summer on, bringing philosophy of science in, a philosopher from Pittsburgh whose name I can't remember at the moment. But so there's been a welcoming history. They've been very interested in and very supportive. The current director is fantastic, and right now he and I have a grant from the James S. McDonald Foundation, which is intended to infuse history and philosophy of science thinking and work into the MBL across the whole institution. Wow. So it will support early career fellows in the sciences and in history, philosophy of science to come and work on projects, but to work together. There'll be a coordinator who will help to do events and workshops and that kind of thing. If people are interested in knowing more, contact me about that, because it's just, we're getting up and running, and we have a coordinator for the project, Kate McCord, who will be helping to make things happen.
Okay, great. Yeah, and if you could say a little bit about, so what would, as a student in history and philosophy of science, or maybe in history and philosophy, what kind of benefits might they expect taking advantage of, either a course or a project coming to the MBL?
Yeah, so good question. We have a cluster of activities. So historians can come and use the stuff, so to speak, the archives, and interview people about old times. But most recently, in November, we had a small workshop that Kate McCord organized that brought together about 15 people. So the group was about half biologists and half historians and philosophers, and it was exploring making choices and underlying assumptions in the scientific work. So the scientists were all charged with talking, everybody talked no more than 15 minutes, so talking about their work and getting to the core of their work and pointing to what they thought were assumptions that they had made or were making in their work, and think in particular about assumptions that they might be making that might make the work less exciting, important, successful than it might be. And it was quite interesting to hear them talk about making choices because they needed to do the safe thing in order to get the next grant, but how excited they were to hear about the philosophers and historians' work and talking about the assumptions that they were making, and starting to have conversations together. How do you recognize an assumption when it's there? I mean, we all make assumptions we don't question. So how do we learn to question them? How do we learn to doubt and be skeptical in a philosophical and productive way, not just, fake facts will replace them.
Sure.
But how do we, in a very productive way, be sure that we're being skeptical and therefore doing the best possible work? And it's really exciting to have the biologist working in a wonderful environment, in a place where you just know, for a century and a third, leading biologists like T.H. Morgan, Jacques Loeb, others, have been in that place, having, maybe you like to imagine the same kinds of discussions, or maybe not, because they weren't quite as clever as we are. I don't know. Sure. But so there's the opportunity to have that kind of discussion, that kind of engagement with the scientists who are open to spending the time out of the lab to sit down and work together. At that workshop, before we did it, a couple people of the scientists said, I might have to leave early and go get my kid. But actually not one of them left even a minute early. They rearranged things because they wanted to be there the whole time.
That's great. That's fantastic. That's really great to hear. So I imagine you'll be going this summer?
Yes. Yes,
Right.
and now, yes, we have the seminar in May, and then we have the history project ongoing, and if anybody wants to visit, let us know. There's also a fellowship through the library, the Kathy Norton Fellowship. If anybody has a small project that they would like to go and spend some time in the library or in the archives, that fellowship will cover that. Last year we had an undergraduate from Brown who was working on history of cell biology and looking at how what we can see has changed and how the way that we see has changed the way we talk about it, which is quite interesting. And she ended up doing some cool videos and other things, but with the Kathy Norton Fellowship. So there are a variety of ways that people can get there. Again, if anybody wants to contact me or
absolutely. I can include some notes or some contact info or a link to the page in the show notes.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Okay, good.
Well, so maybe we can bring things up to speed. So what's going on with you in terms of research or pedagogical interests currently at Arizona State?
Well, we have the embryo project. We have lots of other things, yada, yada, things continue. No, I run things. I make things happen that I like, which is great fun and a wonderful opportunity. My own research kind of happens, we bought a house in Woods Hole, so we spend as much time there as we can.
Oh, nice.
And often I kind of tuck away in my office that I rent there in the library and work on projects. This summer, I'm excited about a book that I'm working on with two of our graduate students. We tentatively titled it, What If You Were Your Own Twin?
Huh.
Which sounds crazy, but it's actually biologically possible. And we know of cases where embryos have absorbed the twin, and so you have two genomes. And so there are actual cases like this. So what does it mean? What does it tell us about personhood? If you had two fertilized embryos and they merged together into one, this is not the traditional question about twinning. They merged together into one. Did you have two persons that are now one, or you don't become a person till later? Oh, wait, if you don't become a person till later, that should have policy implications. So, interesting. How do we think about the science? What difference does thinking about the science make in terms of the world and policy, et cetera, are all questions.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. Who are you working on the book with?
Two of my grad students who are actually sisters, but not twins. Alexis Aboud and Carolina Aboud. They're both quite wonderful. One's very interested in the history of laws and the legal discussions, and the other one's interested in changing language and how we come to use different language because of various social and biological factors, and then how the choices of language influence the ideas and what we take into the research into the lab.
Very nice, very nice. Well, that sounds like a very exciting project. And you said the book will be coming out.
No, I don't know when it's coming out.
Sometime in the future. Yeah,
we're working on it. Sometime in the future, right?
Cool.
Forthcoming, coming
awesome.
forth.
Excellent, excellent. Is there anything else you're currently excited about, or maybe some other things you're hoping to maybe do in the future?
Oh, there are lots of things all the time. I think the main thing that I want to be sure that we cover is to touch on the fact at Arizona State we have a graduate program in history and philosophy of science, PhD program, as you know. We have a PhD program and a master's program in biology and society, which includes history and philosophy of science and environmental topics and bioethics, policy, and law areas. And it's interesting how the world works. So we were ranked very highly by the Leiter Report for a few years, and we had lots of applicants to the program. And then, for whatever reason, Barry Leiter dropped us from that list. I think because the philosophy PhD at ASU was discontinued, and so
those are typically combined, right? Yeah, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we still existed, but they somehow didn't anymore, and now they're recovered. But at any rate, the Leiter Report has such impact in people thinking about where to go to graduate school that they don't look. So again, I'm giving a case study. It's just one. There are other really interesting programs around the U.S. and Canada, elsewhere, that don't show up in the standard ways. And those programs may be for you, for particular people, or for especially the grad students and the faculty, your undergrads, who are looking for places. Those programs may be more interesting and provide more opportunities than some traditional programs. Not black and white, not saying one's better than the other, but the diversity of different kinds of programs gets hidden when we have a list and say, here is the list of programs that are ranked by this one person, this one process. We're missing a lot of other things, and that's unfortunate. People should look farther and spread the word farther through social media and such wonderful things as this podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, so what kinds of, if folks were to go to Arizona State, what might they expect in terms of graduate study?
If they came to Arizona State, they would have the opportunity to work with philosophers in the philosophy department or historians in the history department, but also, and most importantly, with biologists. For our PhD committees, almost everybody has somebody from outside of ASU as well, and from outside of the core group. So bringing in one of the biologists is something that we kind of encourage people to do. Grad students sit in on lab meetings and discussion groups with other grad students in other fields, and I think that exchange is very, very valuable. But also, we support students to do research at and visit and learn at places like the MBL and others. So I'm not saying everybody should come to ASU. We're not rich. We don't have fancy fellowships. We don't have a giant endowment. If you come to a place like ASU, you're going to do TA work and RA work and be part of the embryo project. It's just different. It's right for some kinds of students. Pittsburgh is the right place for some kinds of students. Indiana is the right place for HPS, those two. Lots of other places for philosophy of science, lots of places if you want to do more technical work, et cetera. But don't forget to look at the places that are different, are developing places like Calgary, and Calgary's program reaching out in the public arena as well.
Yeah, we had a couple students a master's student and a PhD student, I believe, recently transfer over to Calgary. So
and things are developing there, and people don't always notice. They just go by what the reputation was from the past, which is why, for example, Princeton often has its medical school. When they just do polls, Princeton Medical School will rate in the top 10, even though they don't have one.
That's some pretty surprising statistics.
So if for a prospective student, look more broadly.
Yeah. How would you, so I guess, looking for more broadly, how would one go about, I suppose, going, taking the letter report into what it is and finding these other kinds of programs?
Yeah, do more networking and sort of look at, just searching and seeing, from the standard programs, where do those people come from, networking with a few people, like Sandy Mitchell, who you interviewed recently, who's president of PSA, or Ken Waters is president of PSA. Those guys will tell you, look at what you can gain by attending a meeting, and so the undergraduates probably aren't going to do that, but graduate students in attending a meeting, grad students can then tell their undergrads about other programs that exist, and so it's sort of spread the word. Florida State, when Michael Ruth went to Florida State and built a program there, everybody knew, Michael Ruth moved, but nobody really paid attention that there was a program developing for a few years, and it took a few years of really hard work on his part to build up a program that people know about. And so people could have paid attention and said, this guy moved to this place. We just hired a guy, Beckett Sterner, who was at Chicago and as a grad student, and he's great. So notice that somebody has moved to a place, and then look and say, what are they doing? Why are those people moving?
Okay. So I know this might be very future thinking that, there will be several of us, myself included, who are graduate students who will eventually come and find ourselves in jobs through certain places, perhaps it as executive directors, but maybe in more insular philosophy departments or history departments without these kinds of programs. What does it take to really get a program going, such as like that Michael Roos did, going to Florida State and starting something?
I have no idea. It's as historians will point out, everything is locally contextually dependent. So there's not one answer except to be wise about your local context and to be opportunistic and to pay attention and be willing to try things. One of our grad students got a really nice job at University of Western New England that a lot of people were interested in that job, and she got the job because she had background in biology and philosophy. She had a master's from Western Ontario and had been part of the Rotman Institute there. That's a great program, and then come to Arizona State for her PhD, and then she's gone there. And one of the things they told her is that they were hoping that she, as a new faculty member, would not just teach courses that would bridge the sciences and philosophy in particular, but that she would start thinking of ways to bring the undergraduate students more into research and into how to think about intersections of science and philosophy, and that eventually that could develop to getting those students more involved in moving on to graduate programs, and so so there was an interest, and so she could either kind of ignore that and just do her thing, or she could jump in and pick up on that. Well, she just started in January, and so she's off and running and saying, okay, let's work on how we can get students involved in research here. So I think it's, hearing when people are telling you there's an opportunity and then taking it is important.
Well, thank you. I think that's been a really good opportunity. It sounds like you yourself made an opportunity happen at Arizona State, encouraging others to do so. So, well, this is great, Jane. Is there any, we've about come to the end of time. Is there anything else you wanted to say or include to anyone out there in the history and philosophy of science world?
Well, really just to thank you for doing this and communicating, because communication and collaboration is really essential in what makes things happen. We've been talking about me, and that's the way you've set up these podcasts, is about individuals, but each one of us has a lot of sticky fingers, so to speak, in a good sense, and is connected with lots of other people, and everything we do is in collaboration with other people, whether it's our students or our instructors, but all the other people that we work with. And so thanks to everybody, really, and thanks to you for recognizing that this discussion is so important.
Absolutely. And I think I really like that point. Like, based on the framework of the podcast, it one could say it promotes this sort of individual kind of focusing on the individual genius or so to speak, but it really is about communications and making connections. And certainly that's something that you emphasize, and I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for doing that.
Happy to do so, yeah. And unfortunately, I can't make it out to MBL this year. Otherwise, I would have applied. But I'm very much looking forward to doing it in a coming year. So I will definitely let you know.
I hope you will. Add it a lot. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Jane. Well, have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and hope to see you soon.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.